Good evening, everyone, English teachers and English lovers. I am Simara, a professor of language and literature at IFRS Canoas campus, and I am helping today, this evening, with the organization of this event, which is held by Partners of the Americas, RS Indiana, in partnership with IFRS. As a mediator, we'll have our partners representative, Ellen Caroline Melo de Oliveira. Good evening, Ellen. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. So it's a pleasure to be here again, in the second semester. And I hope we have more and more English lovers to enlighten our meetings, our monthly meetings. And I have a lot of things to tell you, but at the end of this meeting, so please stay with us up to the end. Our meeting is about 1 hour, so it is short and sharp. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you. For the ones who don't know Ellen, she works as an ESL teacher in public schools of São Chico, São Francisco de Paula, in Rio Grande do Sul, and she also works online for Conley University in the USA. Okay, she is in Rio Grande do Sul. She lives in Rio Grande do Sul currently. So, Teacher Continuing Education presents English Culture and Teaching with Philip DeLacy White. Philip, welcome. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce Philip first, and then I will hand over to him. Okay. Philip is an Englishman residing in Porto Alegre for just under 30 years. Only that, Philip. So a lot of experience as an Englishman in Porto Alegre.
Yeah.
He's an English teacher, translator, proofreader, besides being an actor and a singer. Only that. A full hat. He has co-written 2 books, very interesting books. And as a reader, I'd like to say that they are great books. Guia de Pronúncia do Inglês para Brasileiros. No, this one is not here. And Manual para quem ensina inglês, which is this lovely book. He's also a great enthusiast of architecture, history in general, and local history, gardening, and, as he says, messing in the kitchen. So, introductions made, let's start our event. So, Philip, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you once again. This is the 3rd time I've had this invitation. I'm very pleased to be able to participate, and I hope it'll be of some relevance and interest. I don't really need to say much about myself because Mara's given me a grand introduction already, so really that's it, what she said. Perhaps I might just add that when I arrived in 1993, I was supposed to stay for a year, and that just shows, of course, that we can never predict anything really, because it's almost 30 years and I'm still here, and actually having no intention to leave, so let's hope it's another 30 years, who knows. So the subject we're going to talk about here is English culture and teaching, though I may add, I'm not specifically talking about English culture in this presentation. That's not to say that we can't talk about it later in all sorts of questions specifically about English culture. I'm more interested in talking about it, or culture, in terms of how we use it in the classroom, what's its use, why do we put it there, and also some other aspects of it. So here we go. What do we mean by the word culture? Well, it's a word I'd often heard when I first arrived here, and it seemed to have a special and curious emphasis in Brazil. And for me in particular, I linked it to being falsely addressed as doutor, which, quite honestly, I couldn't understand, but a lot of people seem to do it. Maybe it's because I used to wear a tie, or I don't know exactly what the connotation was, but people wrongly made this address to me. And the words seem to apply here, imply here, someone elevated, someone in a certain sense superior. And I didn't like it, especially because people would say to me, in Portuguese, você é muito culto. And I really couldn't understand it. I'd never considered myself muito culto. And well, I even suspected it was related to this known familiar Brazilian sense of inferiority, and therefore being cultivated was a passport to that desired upper level. Well, I've since reassessed my relationship with the word. Everybody carries with them their own baggage, that their upbringing, access to education, experience, and their own personal desires and aspirations offer them. And beyond that, if we're even minimally curious, we will be open to whatever baggage somebody else is carrying. And we can peep into each other's bags and see what's in them. Take out some of the items, admire them or not, even exchange some of them. And it's this sense of exchange that for me is the key to making the presence of baggage, which we can now term culture, make sense within a classroom context. In my 29 years here in Brazil, I've grown immensely as a person with this rich cultural exchange. I'd like to talk briefly about education in general. Obviously, the broader your education, the larger your baggage. Now, something I have observed here in Brazil, which I won't go into why, but it's a fact, that in many state schools and even some private schools, the focus is always on utilitarian, as I will term it, education. In other words, education, which of course it needs to guide people towards a career or help them pass vestibular or whatever it is they want to do. But sadly, there is a terrible absence of a broader education. For example, singing lessons. Now, when I say singing lessons, I don't mean professional singing lessons. I mean a classroom with a decent pianist and offering songs that people can learn, and of course, broadens their cultural knowledge of Brazilian music, popular music, folkloric music. I have heard with dismay from many people, students who then perhaps came on as older students, that they never had this beyond maybe a school band. So no real singing, no learning of musical instruments, no school orchestra, no school choir, and no theatre, no chance for students to try another skill, maybe improve their confidence levels, etc., by participating in plays. This happens very rarely. And for me, this is something that should really, really be addressed, because it relates to what I'm talking about in terms of we need a broader education. If we go back to medieval times, of course, the very privileged few that had that education had this extremely broad education. It was not necessarily going to help them in their daily lives, but it gave them a background. And as much as we need the education for passing exams and getting a job, we're not whole people if we can't include the other things. Now, I've of course had all sorts of students, some very, very highly skilled in a particular area, let's say a brain surgeon or somebody very skilled in diabetes or whatever it is. And sometimes I've been astounded when I've discovered that their outside interests are so limited that it does not detract from their great and essential ability in whatever profession they've chosen. But it means that they've not had a lot of contact with other things. And this for me makes us limited people. Perhaps I'll give an example. I have various nephews and nieces here. The two youngest are 15. From a very early age, I did my level best to educate them in terms of reading. So I always bought really nice books, beautiful illustrations, nice editions to try and stimulate them. I won't say I completely failed, but it was definitely not mission accomplished. And I finally bought my last books for them this year, and I've actually decided that's the end of it. I'm not trying any harder. Did my best. I think one reason is that they are the generation of smartphones. Obviously, smartphones are marvelous. I've got one. But as an example, when I'm with them socially, their smartphone is as essential to them as me putting on a pair of trousers. I mean, they just can't be without it. And I noticed they don't interact very well socially because they're always on their phones. They try a little bit of conversation, but then they get back to it, and it's usually games. Well, obviously, something's going wrong there, because all the time they're on the phone, they're not reading, they're not looking into other things. And in my opinion, they will not become particularly interesting people, because they won't have this world around them, extra world that they can draw on, we can draw on in all sorts of ways. Let me make a comparison to someone else completely different. A couple of years ago, a man called Jim Minnis died aged, at a ripe old age of 97. He was a very important man in my life. He was the father of a couple of sisters who, until now, are very close friends of my brother and I. And he was probably the most disciplined man I ever met. And I've always looked up to him as a model, as a role model. He was a teacher of French, Latin, and German. He retired age 65 and then enjoyed 32 years of retirement. Well, every single morning for 3 hours, Jim Minnis studied until the end of his life. Now, he didn't need to study. He could have done all sorts of other things. He didn't need to, but he did, because he knew that life is always offering us other things if we look for them. This broadening of culture, if you like. He was always looking to right, to left, up and down, always looking, always curious. And this is something that I think we need all of us to hang on to be essentially permanently curious and not stuck, for example, in our smartphones or just on media, etc. And having this rather frivolous sort of existence. Of course, I'm not saying we're all doing this, but I know that it's a tendency today. Well, let's go back to our subject more. Obviously, as teaching a group of 15 or more students as opposed to 2 or 3 involves a different set of skills, I'm not going to use this space to discuss it. But instead, I'd like to talk about what sort of cultural baggage we can use and also mention a few precautions. Obviously, what we need to remember first are the needs and goals of the student or students. Is it just to get the rudiments of the English language? Is it to improve a particular skill? Is it to gain fluency? Or is it something isolated, such as learning the skills required for translation? Well, depending on the focus of these lessons, will dictate to a lesser or greater extent how much cultural input can be included. Obviously, I realize I'm going to be saying some very obvious things here, right, to a lot of people, but forgive me for that, but it's just to put it in the context. It's always a good idea to find out as much as possible about your student or students and their interests. And obviously, this helps guide you in your choice of additional material. So what sort of cultural material are we talking about? Well, the range is enormous. And here are just some ideas. Poetry, songs, literature, art, fashion, history, photography, cooking, current affairs, articles, games. The list is extensive. And what is, in a sense, magical about the inclusion of any one or more of these items is the way the subject assists in the language learning process, almost despite itself. Songs, for example, with English lyrics on YouTube, or poetry, as I mentioned, which is infinite. With art, you can explore prepositions of space, vocabulary in general, and much, much more. So the students can learn new language by the contents content itself, and at the same time be exposed, in the case of art, to the works of great painters. Maybe they've never even seen them before, but they get a chance to have a window into this within the English context and be at the same time learning. And here lies the key word, stimulated. And I believe that one of the core duties of a teacher is to stimulate, and thereby the student gains impetus and enthusiasm to keep going. And without doing this, we're doing a great disservice to ourselves and much more the students. Small children, for example, learn their native language principally through stimulation, and young people and adults are no different. One of my little secrets is to trick students into learning language skills. They become so involved in the introduced material that the new language acquired becomes absorbed almost unnoticed. And that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because if somebody's got very enthusiastic and they're losing the vocabulary that they need, they're so busy trying to express it or talk about it that it's coming in a natural way, as opposed to giving them a list of 6 words to learn by next Wednesday, which obviously is pretty dull. Telling stories, real ones, can generate interest and stimulus, and will often encouraging students to tell their own. Again, this is linking to cultural exchange. Obviously, me, being English, I'm bringing stories from England, albeit 30 years ago, but obviously I visit, so. But it kind of, it's very good because you're, first of all, as a teacher, you're becoming personally involved, and at the same time, you can get feedback from your students, and they might tell their own, or you ask them to tell something. So again, that's something. Okay, let's talk a little bit about precautions. What might be the obvious precautions regarding the inclusion of our cultural baggage in English teaching? I think we can not only look at the cultural baggage context we might bring ourselves, but also in language teaching books, or books for the students. I think there's been great headway in this direction, and I'm not talking about the headway English books, but in terms of a more cultural inclusion in the context. Rather interestingly, today, a student brought a book, and in fact it's here. It's just a coincidence, culture and English practice. It was a pure coincidence, but it just brought it this afternoon. And I was having a look at it, and there I saw what is one of the things that I feel we have to be careful about, is the fact that although it was supposed to be cross-cultural, it was very much predominantly North American. So there were like sort of 2/3 North American and 1/3 a few other countries. And this is something which, well, I'll talk about in a minute about what we can do in relation to that, about being sort of bombarded by another culture. I talked about, yes, here we are, sorry. So if a language book is making these unapologetic references, and by that I mean a kind of arrogant assumption that all language learners will automatically equate themselves with them, big error, the teacher can turn it right round and stimulate their own students to make comparisons using their own equivalent. So thus, instead of an imposed cultural reality, it becomes an interesting cultural exchange. I think this is terribly important because some students may not be interested in learning about what people do at high school in the United States, or they might be interested as long as they can have some kind of relationship with their own experience, their own reality. Otherwise, this is awful feeling of being sort of dictated to, in a sense. So I make a big effort not to let that happen. This also, again, relates to the importance of getting to know your students as much as possible so that you can really comprehend their cultural reality. And you can judge what material might be relevant and accessible once you've got a clear idea of what capacities those students have. Let's take poetry, for example. A well-chosen poem in terms of age range, subject, etc., can be a great platform for students, because not only are they going to be exposed to the poem, a poet, and obviously, again, this comes about what's your baggage, how much baggage do you have to bring? In other words, the more poetry you know, the wider your range will be for you to choose something appropriate. But what can be so great about this is they're exposed to a poem, maybe good poetry. They've got all the vocabulary stuff you can work on as much as you want. But then, of course, you can transform into something much more exciting. So you can then suggest they compose their own. Obviously, you're going to need at least the intermediate level, but they can compose their own. Or another idea from that, again, it's like a platform, springboard, if you like, is that they could maybe take a poem, look for a poem, in this case from Brazil in Portuguese, and perhaps have a go at translating it, or even the teacher can select and maybe select one of them to translate, to again integrate them with something that they have a stronger reference to. Let me see now. Oh yes, I mentioned earlier the smartphone generation. Well, I've not explored this. I suppose I've got a slight barrier to it. But I think, and this might be something we can discuss later, that dipping into this specific baggage of online games could possibly generate surprises for cultural expression, or expansion and exchange. Maybe the types of games they have could lead, if it's about having to find some treasure, or those rather violent ones about killing as many people as you possibly can. But I mean, there might be ways of getting their interest through that into a broader subject, maybe cross-reference to a film or a story, and maybe even get them to write stories based on that. So I think perhaps that's something that should be looked at, because as it is a reality, and as I've seen very clearly with my two 15-year-old nephews, maybe rather than just keep, as I was doing, throwing books at them, maybe there are other ways around it to sort of get it. Perhaps I can conclude here that as teachers, we can obviously bring our own cultural baggage to the classroom, and through it stimulate the students to look for and discover their own through this exchange idea. For me, in this case, it's a win-win situation. And to finish, what you have built up, and like Jim Minnis that I made the reference to, continue building up personally, will accompany you always, always. And it just keeps growing and growing. And you'll find yourself making spontaneous references. And these, when they're relevant, in my opinion, can only enrich your students' integrated learning experience. Well, that's the end of my actual presentation, but hopefully now we've got something to inspire us to talk and comment on, and perhaps talk about people's own personal experience with this, or even problems they've encountered, and maybe we can find solutions and new ideas. So over to you. I think, it's Samara now, is it?
Yeah, thank you, Philip. So interesting. I've taken loads of notes here, but I would like to know from Ellen if you'd like to ask a question firstly, Ellen, or would like me to start? I have loads of questions here.
I am organizing the chat here.
Okay, so I will ask the first question, and you can interrupt me when.
Okay, I will. No worries.
Okay. So, Philip, I found very interesting what you said about the tricks. And I think it's good when you think from the teacher's perspective and from the student's perspective as well, how it could work. And you talked about telling stories. Teachers generally like using this storytelling as an approach for teaching the skills in general, reading, and then you can work with speaking and listening, developing a language, writing. So it's a good approach for English teaching, and it's a good way for learning for the students, in order to encourage them to read more. So I'd like to ask you if you could talk a little bit more about it, or maybe the authors or books you generally use. Of course, that depends on the age. And when you think of children, it's one sort of approach. But if you think of adults or teenagers, but in general, if you could talk a little bit more about it, that would be very interesting for students and teachers.
Right. Well, first of all, when I said telling stories, this also includes my own. Now, I personally have anecdotes that go on forever. People even joke about it and say Philip stories, because I just somehow accumulate lots and lots. And so what I find is that during the context of a class, very often something comes up which reminds me of a particular story. Maybe it's a funny one, maybe it's ironic, maybe it's simply relevant. And this brings much more stimulus to the subject, because suddenly it's a real story, it's a real event, and so I couldn't really give guidance on that, because this comes from my cultural baggage, which is coming with me. So I picked that up with stories. Absolutely, as you said, Samara, it really depends on the age group, as we know. Teaching a 6-year-old, obviously you're looking at childish. When I say childish, I mean for children, either stories, poems, illustrations. These are, of course, really important. For adults, I tend to use short stories. Now, obviously, it will depend on their ability. I've got some favorite authors. Saki is one, and D.H. Lawrence is another. Hardy is another, and well, there are many others. Well, as you can sort of see behind me, I've got an extensive library. So for me, it's very easy, because I just look up there, get a book. I might recommend it to somebody. What I do sometimes is, with a short story, I will say, especially if it's related to a topic we've been talking about, I'll say, well, look, I know a story that sort of is related to this, and maybe you'd like to borrow it. Unfortunately, I've lost quite a few books that way, but I still do it. And this is great for a student to read, then come back and we discuss it. And of course, it can go on forever, you know, the area. So obviously, this is remembering that I'm now mostly one-to-one. I do have a class of 3 students, but it's not like when I was teaching larger groups. Not to say it can't be done, of course, because you can still make copies and give them out, and then it becomes group discussion. You can put people into groups in pairs or 4, see what they've come up with and bring it back. So this works really well. Have I answered your question there?
Yes. I think I have a question in the chat, Ellen.
Yes, we do. So Dulce Maria, I'm sorry, I will try to pronounce this surname, but I'm not sure that I will be successful. Mielczarski. She said she really enjoyed when Philip talked about video games, because she learned a lot of vocabulary using them. So she's asking, do you think teachers could engage more in them to teach? Engage more in video games to teach?
Perfect. A very, very, very good question from Dulcie. That sort of relates, doesn't it, to that little comment I made about, I hadn't thought about it very much, but maybe one could. And I do think, definitely, for example, here comes one of Philip's stories, right? Some years ago, I was a volunteer at Clinicus Hospital. And there was a young man there who had my name, and he was very sick. And nobody could communicate with him very well. He'd become very angry. I suppose he was 15, and he was kind of angry with everything. Until one magic day, I discovered that he was interested in the Second World War. So I brought in my pictorial Second World War book, and I'd noticed he was watching these video games, sort of war games. And then I sort of casually plopped it on the bed, and then also brought a photograph of my dad, because my father, my parents' generation, they were in the Second World War, and my grandparents in the First World War. So I've got this strong connection. So I brought a photograph of my dad in his uniform. Well, this boy's eyes just kind of burst. He couldn't believe it. He said, "Was your father in the war?" And I said, "Yes, he was." Then I gave him a hand grenade. Of course, it wasn't primed, and which was a gift. But what we did was, I said, "How about learning some English?" And he said yes. And now, I said, I hadn't remembered this, but now I'm recalling, I've been stimulated to remember it. And the first thing I did was look at the video games. And I took down the words that were being used, like "watch out," "over here," and etc. And well, it worked. So I'm quite sure, Dulcie, that teachers could do that. And I think, in referring to those two nephews I mentioned, is to somehow make that very sort of internal thing, it's just them and their game, suddenly come out and be part of a proactive activity. That would be brilliant. I mean, vocabulary, yes, I'm sure. And as I said, why not, with the vocabulary, get them to write a short story, make their own stories, and create their characters, help them create their characters. I think it could be very interesting. So I think definitely for 2022, it would be a good idea.
Thank you, Philip. Ellen would like to ask a question, or I have a list of questions here, but I don't want to be selfish.
I have one. I was thinking about like engaging, and then I was trying to remember what engaged me when I was young. And I've always loved, I've always read a lot of comic books, sorry.
Yeah, comic strips, yeah.
I was a big fan of Monica's Gang, and other, magazines that we could, by that time, I had to convince my mother to buy at the newsstand. I don't even think there are newsstands nowadays. They disappeared. Yeah. Anyway, it was something that I was addicted about. And we always have that character that, it's the character that we love most, or in a country that has more fans. For example, I believe in Brazil, it's Monica and Cebolinha. Yeah, maybe in the US it's like Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, something like
that. Snoopy, I think too. Yeah, Snoopy,
yeah. Yeah. And what about in England? What would you suggest? To have a wider variety of comics to engage students. Yes.
Right. Well, I have to confess, it's been many years since I bought comics in England. I mean, we had them as children, and I did love them. The Beano was one, which I absolutely loved. And funny enough, in the class with the 6-year-old, Rupert Bear. Rupert Bear is still popular, incredibly, although he was invented in the 1930s. And I'm sure there are probably others which I'm not aware of, because I just don't have that relationship anymore. But just so I can't actually give you any names. Maybe if you go on Google and look for, current children's comics, probably something would come up. I certainly enjoy them. Popeye was one. It was American, but I loved Popeye. I still got a Popeye annual. My mother tried to make me give it away 3 times, and I hid it every time. And I managed to keep it until today. It's on my bookshelf. Can't give you a specific one that's current. I don't know if the Beano is still around. It might be, because in it there were many characters like Billy Bunter, Betty Bunter, what was it, Pete's Pockets, and I've forgotten his name now. guy with lots of black hair. So I don't know, but presumably, yes, they could be used. Most definitely could be used, or equivalent one, and bring it in, stimulate students, and then all sorts of stuff can come out of it. You could even, if you're really daring and do it, even get them to act it out a bit, act out one of the stories, and so they'd have a lot of fun with that, and they're using the language. So that's the best answer I can give you on that one.
Thank you, Philip. When I talk to my students nowadays, they are really into those Japanese ones that they call mangas or something like that.
Right.
And, it is a role that I don't really understand. And sometimes it is good to bring something like old that is going to be something new for them.
Sure.
Yeah, that's why I was asking, because the first time I presented Garfield for my students, they were like, "Oh, this is so cool!" And to me, it was some old stuff,
Right.
And and these things, they are not on Instagram. They don't scroll these things every day. So I guess bringing something old, sometimes it's something new for them.
I'll just bring one of these now. Look, let's just see now.
He has everything in that room. Everything is there.
This is. It was actually given to my brother in 1969. But I kept all of them in the end. He let me. There's Rupert, right? This is Rupert.
Oh.
And this is the way it is. And what they've got is in this book, and you can still buy Rupert books, you've got this bit here, which actually I used to find really boring as a child. I used to read the bits under the pictures. And they were amazing stories, still with the original illustrations. And I know that it went on to the television, and I believe you can still see Rupert, animated Rupert. But I agree with you about old being new. And actually, may I just make another interesting, it's not quite related to comics, but it's related to songs. And when we talk about cultural exchange, now, I've had a lot of students, we talked about music, and so I'll say, well, who can you recommend me that I don't know about? And they'll say, oh, a name. And if there's some in front of my screen, on we go to YouTube, there it is. I say, oh, right, interesting. And then I then do my part. And I'll dig up some 1960s singer or group. Many, many times students have gone, wow, they're amazing. I had no idea. And I said, well, yes, of course you didn't, but you do now. And you can go into it. So, I mean, this is something, this is a personal thing, right? But I get frustrated by this thing about new, and nobody bothers to look behind. This is nonsense. I mean, as mentioned earlier, I've got an interest in history. Because lots of marvelous things are produced, old films. You can watch old films and see them in the genre that they are, so accept it, that's the way it is, and be moved, be excited, be whatever. Whereas this awful thing of, it's old. Now, we all know in Brazil, the term old is used in a rather derogatory way, and often rather weirdly, because, for example, I live in a house which was built in 1935. Well, it is coming on to be old, isn't it? It's sort of little under 100 years, so it's 88 years old. But in England, obviously, from an English perspective, that's not old. I mean, when you start looking at something that says 10, 20, or 11 something, or 12, that's old. But people have this way of rather looking down on old. Maybe there's another thing about this thing of Brazilians in general. I'm sorry, I'm making a horrible generalization here, but Brazilians in general looking ahead, always looking ahead, and not looking behind. We can see this in our cities. So little is preserved of them because so little was valued. And we've lost so much in Porto Alegre. It's just astounding. It's astounding. But so yes, there's a rich source of stuff. We do not need to limit ourselves. Yes, for the connection with young people, as you just said, show me what it is. So okay, I'll learn, I'll find out, I'll take an interest, and then throw it back and bring in another one. So I absolutely agree with you. It works. Yeah.
When we talk about books, book is a sort of technology. It's one of the most important technologies the human being has ever made. So sometimes people, students are just thinking of mobile phones, new technology, but we have old technologies which work very well when
Right.
the topic's learning
Yeah.
different ways.
Yes. Yes.
Samara, sorry.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I was just would mention that these days I saw a text. It was on the internet that it was about technology and stuff, and it was like complaining about this new technology. And then at the end, they mentioned the source of this people complaining about technology, and it was like, I don't know, from the 1700s, more or less. And this person from like 300 years ago was concerned about books. It wasn't a concern about cell phones, smartphones, television, internet. And they mentioned the source, everything. And I thought, Jesus, yes. Sometimes we are afraid of new things, that we are becoming obsolete. But I guess according to studying and learning, everything sums up. Everything is like, give me more.
Yeah, that's very interesting. For example, I like technology. I enjoy it. I mean, look, let's face it, we're using it right now. This would have been impossible a few years ago. And I'm fairly au fait with quite a lot. Instagram, not so good at. I have a great friend, Pablo, who actually popped in today and gave me my first official lesson in actually getting to understand how to use Instagram. I said to him, I'm going to need more than one class. It only lasted 10 minutes. And he went, you press here for this, and you do that for that. And I said, look, I'm not going to remember all this. But okay. So I agree with you. I think that we must never be afraid of it. We have to embrace it and use it. Use it. Maybe I could use more, but I certainly do use YouTube a lot in my classes. I use the internet. It's so interesting when something comes up and all of a sudden you think, oh, I know, click, I'll show you an image of it. I'll show you a little, a person, a particular person that might become relevant. So I found my classes have become much more dynamic because of technology. There's no question about it. So yeah, we should never think ourselves as obsolete. We just carry on, and embrace it, even if not always full of enthusiasm, because we're afraid of it. Let's face it, we're afraid of it. We're afraid of not being good. You get to my age and think, I'm useless, I don't know it. I don't want that sensation. So I want to feel that I'm not a troglodyte in terms of technology. And I think none of us want to be that, do we? Okay.
We don't have so much time. We have maximum 12 minutes. Yeah, it's passed so fast. But I would like to ask you another question, Philip, because in one of the books you've organized, you talk about erros comuns de alunos brasileiros. It's written this way.
Right.
And we are talking about English culture, cultural differences. They come as well when you are thinking of English culture.
Right.
And seeing you are a private teacher and you work one-to-one as well and small groups of students,
Yeah.
I believe you see quite in depth how Brazilian students, due to their culture, their accent, their language, they make mistakes in English. So I'd like if you could talk about the most common, the ones maybe the most common mistakes Brazilian students make, but the ones they really should avoid, the ones that kind of hurts the ones which hurt your ear for some reason, but connected to the culture somehow. Don't know if you could answer something about it, but I find it so interesting.
Okay. Which are you referring to? My pronunciation book? It's this one. It's this one. Okay. Well, funny if I've got it in front of me. Let me see how to go about that one. Often it's about pronunciation, so there'll be pronunciation problems.
It could be about pronunciation. I think it's an interesting topic.
But really and truly, although this book was aimed at obviously Brazilians, I have to say that a lot of those mistakes, or let's say areas where people feel unsure, occur actually with other nationalities as well. I think although it's written here for Brazilians, I think we would be wrong to say Brazilians are specifically vulnerable to those things, right? Because when we're talking about word order, for example, word order is a typical problem. But I think that if I was speaking to a French person, maybe their problem would be more intonation, right? So Brazilians, I don't think the Brazilians have much problem with intonation. I'm just trying to think how, for example, pronunciation of the. Well, this is probably difficult for most people, but it's definitely difficult for Brazilians. And so when I work on that, I have to look at the phonetic side of it. And I think what I try to do is show people that it's better to speak it correctly or pronounce the words correctly, but it's not the end of the world. I don't make a big fuss about it. So pronunciation in some words like the, sometimes, again, a typical one is not understanding how to elongate the vowels. So where people are saying things like, well, the classic one, instead of saying the sheet, the shit, and instead of saying the peas, the piss, and all this sort of thing. And obviously that can be funny in a class, but that's something I do work on, because my way of thinking is, if it doesn't interfere with the comprehension, I won't worry about it. But if it becomes comical because it's being pronounced wrongly, then I make a point of correcting it. I think, let me just think of something in terms of expressions. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I although it's aimed at Brazilians, I feel, in my experience when I was in London and I was teaching, let's say, at least 10 or 12 nationalities, I found that most people were making the same mistakes. It wasn't really, I mean, we put that in the book because it was aimed at Brazilians, and so let Brazilians identify with it. But I think really and truly, it's for anyone who's got Latin-based language, because obviously we know that there's word order problems, as there were for me, because when I first came here, I used to say, Posso, can I help you? Posso eu ajudar você? I remember saying that. And so, getting it the wrong way around. And as I said, the not elongating the vowels, and having problems sometimes with fitting all the words together. So this thing about elision, where you bring the words together, I do work on that sometimes, and I've got specific books there to help people do that, so that they're not staccato when they speak, or putting in an in between every 3 words. So that's what I work on. But to do that, often, obviously reading, etc., helps, and I'm always coming in. So if there's a pronunciation problem, I'll correct them, unless I'm doing a specific exercise. If I'm doing a specific exercise where I want people to just feel free, then it's minimum intervention. But if it is for me to help them, then I come in there and do it. So I have to confess, I would not specifically say that Brazilians have actually anything different than any other Latin-based language. Obviously, if it were Chinese speaking, we'll have different problems altogether, you know, and or maybe a Japanese or maybe an Arabic person. But let's say Latins, let's say Portuguese, Spanish, Italians, obviously Brazilian, Portuguese, etc., will probably all fit in the same
It's more connected to where the language coming from, the
Yes,
root
precisely.
of the language. Yeah.
Precisely. It's not a Brazilian plague or something, you know. It's yeah.
Yeah. Some time ago, when I was in England, people said, not to me particular, but talking generally about Brazilian foreigners there in the UK, and said, Brazilians, they are considered impolite because they never say sorry. Of course, this is not one language mistake, something wider.
Cultural, yeah.
They never say sorry. They just go straight to the subject. So they are considered very impolite.
Yeah.
They are not being polite in the
No.
way they think, but they are being
But that's not a language problem, is it? It's like
no,
my
it's
sister
not.
just told me a story now. She has a German neighbor in France. He's married a French for many years, and Germans are also like that. And he telephoned her, and now he knew that my sister was interested in buying honey, right? Now, if it was an English person, they'd say, "Oh, hi, Bryony, how are you? It's Peter here. I was thinking about what you were telling me about honey," and no, he phoned up and said, "Hello, Bryony. So, you like honey?" Yeah, it's like straight in there, you know. And so there's a German thing. But I think with Brazilians, I know it's not relevant to the actual language, but whenever I know people are traveling, I always say to them, just fit in, go do what the Romans do. So if you speak to someone, they don't know you and you want information, just say, "Excuse me." That's the first thing. Say, "Excuse me." If you said, "Excuse me," you've got a doorway in. And then, of course, comes all those, "Could you please tell me, da, 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 thank you very much." Because I was talking about this with my sister-in-law, and how I remembered walking in the Head and Sound Park in the first year, and there were two young girls in front of me. Well, I was running in the park at the time. And one was carrying a bottle of water and said, she said, "Quer agua?" She went, "No." And I thought, what? That's so rude. Where was the thank you? She didn't say no thank you. She just said no. And this is part of the language. And I know now Brazilians are not being rude. It's best to say "não obrigado," but a lot of people won't say it. As my sister-in-law pointed out, if you said, quer mais biscoito? No. If you went no, but if you went no, it depends how you say it, you know. So, but yeah, they would come across as rude, because if you said in England, "Would you like another biscuit?" No, it's rude. It's just rude, because where is the thank you? You know, I mean, when we're children, well, I say I don't know about today. I'd like to believe they still are told that. But when we would go to somebody's house, I can remember my mum would always say, "Remember your pleases and thank yous." It was one of those little tips that was given before you went, to make sure you didn't forget to say it, so that you were not classed as being rude. But yeah, but as you know, I think this is about cultural anything. If you go to another, it's like in France, you absolutely must say bonjour before you speak. It's so rude if you don't. And I made that mistake on a train once. I was taken by surprise, because all the staff in the buffet car were at one end, and I didn't say bonjour. I went straight into my question, like, "Is it open?" And there was complete silence. And then I realized, oh my God, I didn't say bonjour. So yeah, it's important to know little things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just to add to this discussion, I remember a teacher I had at Rutgers University. He said that he could like recognize Brazilians when they ask, "I have a doubt," and
Sure. Yeah,
in
yeah,
his movement, and he
sure.
asked me, "What the hell is this? Brazilians do that all the time," and I was like, "I guess it means whatever," because I was surprised. It wasn't
Right.
something like universal, and it's something that Brazilians do. And
Sure.
I got
Yeah.
really,
Yeah, I mean,
surprised by this.
exactly. This thing was you just said about how I have a doubt. Again, this will go right across other nationalities because of course the problem is you get a word, it's similar to what yours is or the way you say it, and you automatically repeat it. And obviously that just needs to be corrected, right? Because of course if you said I have a doubt, the person will probably understand that you have something you want to ask, but that would be a Brazilian one, yeah. But I'm no doubt Italians and Spanish and other people will have something similar, you know. But this thing about, I mean, of course, I've adopted it myself. rather like, rather like.
He is in Brazil. That's explained.
Exactly. And another thing that's very funny that happens to me, where there's a cross-cultural interference, when I go to England, I catch myself saying "ba," and this is very funny because, of course, it doesn't mean anything there. And well, I mean, I just say occasionally someone's questioned me on it, but usually they just let it go and probably think it's something weird that Philip picked up in the tropics, you know. But it's interesting, yeah. We sort of do that.
Awesome. Yes. Speaking about our partner, Jacob, he's from the US and he speaks Ba too. But now
Oh, right.
he's living in Minas. I don't know if he's speaking Y. Yeah,
Oh,
because
right. Yes. Yeah.
why
Right.
so? It's the what people in Minas Gerais usually say as like a I don't
And
know
isn't
something
isn't there
regional.
isn't there some connection to something in English because of this why? I'm sure I've heard that.
Probably,
Yeah,
probably.
there is
Hmm.
some connection with the English presence, with the royal family, with the court,
Yeah,
and
and somebody told me once, I'm not sure, but when they were building railways, that American people and came to Brazil to build the
exactly
railways, and lots of words in English were kind of
right,
added
right,
to Brazilian Portuguese.
right, exactly. As in Rio Grande do Sul, in Rio Grande they talk about cakes, which of course is cakes. The,
Interesting.
yeah, the British were there building the railway there, and this
Yeah.
word stayed. So it's very curious, yeah. Cakes, yeah, yeah. These are just little things, aren't they, that cross over that make it really more. Oh, what's the other one in the northeast with the dance? The what's the famous dance they do up there? The
For all. For
forró,
all. For all. Yes.
exactly. And it was this for all, yeah. So it became a
Yes.
Brazilian word,
Yes.
yeah. So
Very
yeah, very
interesting.
curious. Very curious.
Okay, it's high time. It's a pity that it's high time because this talking was extremely enriching, as someone said here on the comments. And I'd like to thank you a lot, Philip, for your time, sharing ideas and knowledge with us. It was totally awesome. And
Well,
thank you, Samara, for helping with the the contacts, the connections. Thank you. I thank also Andrea and Lucas that are our backstage operators. And I thank all the people that were here with us, watching us, and the ones that sent us their congratulations or questions and things like that. And Well, we don't have our next topic yet because we are still organizing the second semester schedule. But soon we'll share this calendar with you, and I hope we can keep meeting here, to finish this program that has been so amazing. I've learned so much these months with you here online, and I hope we can keep doing that. Maybe, like somewhere where we can talk and have tea together. I don't know, but for a while we'll have these online sessions that have been really, really interesting. So thank you all, guys.
Thank you very much.
Soon we'll send you some emails with more information about the next sessions. And good night, everybody. Good night, Philip. Thank you one more time. It was awesome.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.